Picture yourself standing in a crowded street, horses clattering past, voices shouting, the air thick with smoke and promise. It's Moscow, 1915, and you're P.D. Ouspensky, a man who spent years chasing shadows across continents, only to find the world you've built in your mind might be a sham. Every ritual you lean on, every sip of tea, every argument you win, every restless night you wrestle with could be a trick, a whisper from forces you can't name, steering you through a life you don't truly own. You're not just tired, you're asleep, caught in a hidden fog, moving like a puppet in a play you didn't write, never once spotting the strings. What if you are asleep? Not in the physical sense, but in a deeper way, trapped in an illusion, moving through life like an actor in a play without even realizing it. This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is an idea that's existed for thousands of years, hidden in secret teachings, whispered among mystics and philosophers, and revealed only to those who seek it. One man embarked on a journey to uncover this hidden knowledge. His name was P.D. Ouspensky, and what he found was so extraordinary that he called it nothing less than the miraculous. Today we begin his journey, because his search is also your search. By the end of this video, you might start questioning everything you once believed about reality. Stay until the end, because what you're about to discover could change the way you see your own existence. Tomorrow, we dive deeper. But first, let's begin at the beginning. Imagine it's the early 1900s, a time of great change, of revolutions and scientific discoveries. Among the intellectuals of this era was P.D. Ouspensky, a brilliant Russian thinker, part journalist, part philosopher, and part mystic. Ouspensky had one obsession: the search for real knowledge. But what does that mean? Most people are satisfied with what science tells them. They accept reality as it's presented, believing that truth can be measured with instruments and that logic alone can explain the mysteries of existence. But not Ouspensky. He had studied science, philosophy, and religion, and yet he knew something was missing. Science could explain how things worked, but not why. Religion spoke of higher truths, but offered no proof. And philosophy, it was mostly just words, endless debates that led nowhere. Ouspensky felt there must be something beyond all of this, a higher level of understanding, a missing key that could unlock reality itself. So he set out on a journey. He wasn't your typical scholar, sitting in a dusty library waiting for answers to fall into his lap. No, Ouspensky was restless, driven by a hunger that wouldn't let him settle. He, grown up in Moscow, born in 1878, surrounded by books and ideas. As a young man, he dove into mathematics, physics, even the occult, anything that promised a glimpse of something bigger. But the more he learned, the more he realized how little he actually knew. The world around him was buzzing with progress. Electricity, automobiles, new theories about the universe. But none of it touched the questions burning inside him. What is life really about? Why do we exist? Is there a way to see beyond the surface of things, to pierce the veil of everyday reality? These weren't idle thoughts for Ouspensky. They were a fire in his soul, pushing him to look where others wouldn't. He started writing articles, essays, even books, trying to piece it together. But words on a page weren't enough. He needed experience, evidence, something he could feel in his bones. And so, he left the comfort of his familiar world and went searching. Ouspensky traveled far and wide: Egypt, India, Ceylon, what we now call Sri Lanka. He wasn't just a tourist snapping photos of pyramids or temples. He was a seeker, diving into the heart of ancient cultures, chasing the wisdom that had been passed down through generations. He met gurus who claimed to know the secrets of the universe. He studied texts so old they were crumbling in his hands. He explored the depths of Eastern traditions, hoping to find that missing key he'd been dreaming of. And he saw things that would make most people's jaws drop. He encountered mystics who could slow their heart rate to almost nothing, as if they'd mastered their own bodies. He met men who spoke of remembering their past lives, recounting details with a calm certainty that gave him chills. He watched yogis who'd lived in silence for years, their eyes sharp with a kind of awareness he couldn't quite grasp. It was fascinating, almost unbelievable. For a moment he thought he'd found it, the miraculous, the real knowledge he'd been chasing. But then he paused. Something wasn't right. These experiences were incredible, sure, impressive displays of human potential, but Ouspensky wasn't looking for magic tricks. He wasn't after a sideshow act to write about in his next article. He wanted a system, a method that could reliably and logically lead a person to her consciousness. He wanted to understand how it worked, not just marvel at what it could do, and that's where it fell apart. The teachers he met couldn't explain their methods. They spoke in riddles, in metaphors, beautiful, poetic phrases that sounded wise but didn't hold up under scrutiny. Meditate and you'll see, they'd say. Trust the universe, they'd murmur, but Ouspensky didn't want belief. He wanted understanding. He'd ask, how does this work? Why does it lead to awakening? What's the process? And they'd smile, shrug, or change the subject. It was maddening. He'd come so far, crossed continents, faced the unknown, and yet he felt like he was still grasping at shadows. The pieces were there, but they wouldn't fit together. Disappointed, maybe even a little lost, he packed up and returned to Russia. He'd seen wonders, but he hadn't found the system he craved. Maybe it didn't exist. Maybe his quest was a fool's errand, or maybe he just hadn't looked in the right place yet. One day, back in Moscow in 1915, Ouspensky heard rumors of a mysterious man named G.I. Gurdjieff. This wasn't your average gossip. People whispered about Gurdjieff like he was a legend walking among them. Some said he'd traveled to hidden monasteries in Tibet and Central Asia, places so remote they didn't even show up on maps. Some claimed he possessed secret knowledge lost for centuries, teachings that could rewrite everything you thought you knew. Others swore he could control his emotions completely, never reacting in anger, never acting without purpose, as if he'd cracked some code to human nature. Ouspensky was intrigued. He'd heard plenty of wild stories on his travels, half of them turned out to be nonsense, but something about this felt different. Maybe it was the way people talked about Gurdjieff with a mix of awe and unease. Maybe it was the timing. After years of searching, he was ready for a breakthrough. So he tracked down one of Gurdjieff's lectures, not knowing what to expect. He figured he'd hear some mystical poetry, vague spiritual ideas, same old stuff, different package. But when he walked into that room and listened to Gurdjieff speak, it was like the air shifted. Gurdjieff was what Ouspensky had pictured. He wasn't a frail, bearded sage in flowing robes. He was stocky and intense, with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through you. His voice wasn't soft or soothing, it was direct, almost brutal, like he was daring you to keep up. And what he said, it wasn't poetry, it wasn't vague, it was a punch to the gut. Man is asleep, Gurdjieff declared. Ouspensky froze. Asleep. What did that mean? Gurdjieff didn't pause for dramatic effect. He kept going, his words cutting deeper. You think you are awake, you think you make decisions, but in reality you are nothing more than a machine, reacting, repeating patterns, playing a role that was programmed into you. If you want to wake up, you must first understand that you are asleep. Ouspensky was stunned. This wasn't some fluffy spiritual talk about love and light. This was a challenge, a claim so bold it bordered on insane, and yet it hit him hard. He'd spent years chasing higher consciousness, but Gurdjieff was saying he'd missed the starting line. Asleep, him. A man who traveled the world, studied every system he could find. It was absurd. But the more he thought about it, the more it gnawed at him. What if Gurdjieff was right? He looked around the room, people nodding, some frowning, all hanging on every word. Gurdjieff didn't care if you agreed. He wasn't there to convince you. He was there to wake you up, whether you liked it or not. Ouspensky's mind raced. He met plenty of teachers, but none like this. Gurdjieff didn't talk about God or angels or faith. He talked about reality, cold, hard, and uncomfortably close. And for the first time, Ouspensky felt like he'd stumbled onto something real. Not a fragment, not a riddle, but a system he could sink his teeth into. Most spiritual traditions teach that awakening requires leaving the world behind. Ouspensky knew them well from his travels. There's the fakir, the guy who tortures his body to reach enlightenment. He'll stand on one leg for days, starve himself, push his physical limits until he breaks through. It's intense, almost superhuman, but it's narrow. It's all about the body, nothing else. Then there's the monk, pure devotion, heart and soul poured into faith. He prays, he worships, he surrenders everything to something bigger. It's beautiful, emotional, but it's limited to feeling. And the yogi, he's the mind guy meditating in isolation, mastering his thoughts until he can cut through illusion like a knife. It's powerful, intellectual, but it's detached from life. Ouspensky had seen these paths in action: fakirs in India, monks in temples, yogis in caves. They worked, sure, for the rare few who could commit. But Gurdjieff threw all that out the window. He called his method the fourth way, and it was nothing like Th. E. others. This wasn't about retreating from the world. It was about waking up in the middle of it. No extreme fasting, no blind faith, no dropping everything to sit on a mountain. It was a system for ordinary people, people with jobs, families, bills to pay, people like you and me. That sounded good, practical, even, but it came with a catch. The fourth way wasn't easy. It demanded something harder than physical endurance or endless meditation. It required you to observe yourself every moment of the day. Not just think about it, not just nod and agree, you had to do it. Gurdjieff told Ouspensky to start right there, right then. Watch yourself. See how you act, how you think, how you feel. Look for the machine he kept talking about. So Ouspensky tried it. He went home that night, sat down, and started paying attention. And what he found was terrifying. He wasn't one person, he was a mess of different eyes. 1,000 versions of himself popping up without warning. One, I wanted to work hard, write his next book, chase his dreams. Another, I wanted to sleep late, avoid the day, hide under the covers. Another, I wanted to argue, pick fights, prove it was right. And they weren't working together. They were fighting, tugging him in every direction. He'd be writing, focused, and then, bam, his mind would drift to some petty annoyance from yesterday. Or he'd plan his day and suddenly he'd feel lazy, like none of it mattered. He hadn't noticed before, but now he couldn't unsee it. These eyes were running the show, and he wasn't in charge. How could he be awake when he didn't even have a permanent self? It was like he was a puppet, and the strings were tangled in a dozen different hands. And now we arrive at the most important part. What does this mean for you? Think about your own life. How much of it do you actually control? How many decisions are truly yours? How often are you just reacting, following habits, doing things without awareness? You wake up, check your phone, scroll through the same apps. You get annoyed in traffic, snap at someone, then forget why 5 minutes later. You plan to change, to be better, then fall right back into the same old patterns. Sound familiar? Ouspensky's revelation isn't some dusty old story, it's a mirror. Gurdjieff's claim that we're asleep isn't just about him, it's about us. Right now, today, you're probably sleepwalking through parts of your life. Don't believe me? Try this. Next time you're doing something routine, eating, walking, talking, stop and ask yourself, am I choosing this or am I just doing it? Most of the time, you'll find it's the second one. That's the machine at work. The first step to waking up is realizing you're asleep. It's not fun, it's uncomfortable, even scary. Ouspensky felt it, and you might too. But here, the flip side. Once you see it, you've got a shot at changing it. So start observing yourself. Notice when you act out of habit, grabbing your phone without thinking, eating because it's lunchtime, not because you're hungry. Notice when your emotions control you, anger flaring up, sadness pulling you down, all without your say-so. Notice when you say or do things without choosing them, words slipping out, actions you regret later. Because only by observing your sleep can you begin to wake up. Ouspensky didn't stop with that first night. He kept going, kept watching, and it led him deeper into Gurdjieff's system. That's what we're here for, 30 days of peeling back the layers, following his path. Tomorrow, we'll dive into what it really means to be asleep, and how Gurdjieff said we can start breaking free. This is just the beginning. If you're ready to question everything, if you want to see what's behind the illusion, stick with me. Like this video, share it with someone who needs a shake, and subscribe so you don't miss a step. Let's keep searching for the miraculous together.